The crystal champagne glass shattered against Italian marble as 12-year-old Zara Williams spoke 5 words that would expose the art world's most devastating scandal. Those 5 words, delivered in perfect aristocratic French, didn't just silence a room full of millionaires, they unraveled a criminal conspiracy worth over $200 million. But let's rewind to 30 seconds earlier, when this brilliant child was still invisible, still dismissed, still treated like human furniture in the mansion where her mother scrubbed floors for 15 years. The Whitmore estate wasn't just wealthy, it was generationally, obscenely change-the-world wealthy. Their private gallery housed more priceless art than most national museums, and tonight's charity auction was displaying their crown jewel, a newly acquired Monet water lily masterpiece worth $12 million. The evening's guest list read like a Forbes billionaire directory, each person dripping in diamonds and drowning in privilege they'd never earned but inherited like genetic traits. Mrs. Victoria Petton embodied everything toxic about old money. Her great-grandfather had built railroads on the backs of immigrant workers, and she wore that exploitation like a designer gown. When she spotted Zara standing near the Monet, her reaction was swift and vicious. The child's presence near her people's art triggered something primal in Victoria's prejudiced brain. The assumption that someone who looked like Zara couldn't possibly belong in the same room as refined culture. "Get that little creature away from my masterpiece before she contaminates it," Victoria's voice cycled through classical music and polite conversation like a serrated knife through silk. Her words carried the weight of centuries of systemic racism, the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned their right to dehumanize others. The room's energy shifted instantly. Conversations died. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, and every eye turned toward the unfolding spectacle. Zara's mother, Marie, materialized from the shadows where service workers were expected to remain invisible. Her hands trembled as she rushed forward, her simple black uniform marking her as staff in a room full of people who measured their worth by their ability to purchase human labor. Marie had perfected the art of apologetic invisibility during 15 years of cleaning up after people who saw her as glorified furniture. Tonight, watching her brilliant daughter being verbally assaulted, that careful invisibility cracked like cheap paint. But Zara didn't move. While adults around her operated from scripts of shame and submission, this 12-year-old girl possessed something far more dangerous than wealth or connections. She had knowledge, earned through years of secret study, while the art world's gatekeepers remained blind to her existence. Her dark eyes studied the painting with the intensity of a detective examining evidence, seeing details that million-dollar experts had somehow missed. The moment stretched like a held breath. Victoria Petton expected immediate compliance, the swift removal of this inappropriate child from her rarefied space. The other guests expected a scene that would reinforce their comfortable assumptions about social hierarchies. Marie expected to apologize and disappear, protecting her job and their survival. Dr. Catherine Whitmore, the mansion's owner and an internationally respected art authenticator, expected nothing more than a minor disruption to an otherwise successful evening. Nobody expected Zara Williams to speak, and absolutely nobody expected her to speak in flawless French using technical terminology that would make graduate students weep with envy. When those 5 words left her lips, "C'est peinture et un faux," the evening's carefully orchestrated social performance exploded like a bomb detonated in a cathedral. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was the sound of assumptions shattering, prejudices crumbling, and a 12-year-old genius stepping out of society's shadows into a spotlight that would change everything. Because Zara Williams had just declared their $12 million centerpiece a fake, and she was about to prove that brilliance doesn't require permission to exist. The champagne glass hitting marble wasn't an accident. It was Dr. Catherine Whitmore's hand losing control as her brain processed the impossible. A 12-year-old girl speaking museum-quality French about art authentication wasn't just unexpected, it was a complete violation of every assumption she had built her career upon. The crystal shards scattered across designer shoes worth more than most people's monthly salaries, but nobody noticed. Every eye in the room was locked on Zara Williams, who stood motionless by a painting that might not be what it appeared to be. Victoria Petton's face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light. Shock, rage, disbelief, then a deeper fury that someone she considered subhuman had dared to speak in their sacred space. "This is absolutely preposterous," she hissed, her voice carrying the venom of someone whose entire identity depended on maintaining rigid social hierarchies. A servant's child cannot possibly know anything about authentic French Impressionism. This is what happens when these people forget their place. But Dr. Whitmore raised her hand for silence, her academic instincts overriding social convention. She'd spent 30 years building her reputation as one of the world's leading art authenticators, and something in Zara's voice, the confidence, the precise pronunciation, the casual use of technical terminology triggered every professional alarm she possessed. "Child," she said in French, kneeling to meet Zara's eye level, "repeat what you just said, and tell me why you said it." Zara's response came in rapid-fire French that would have impressed professors at the Sorbonne. She described brushwork inconsistencies invisible to casual observers, paint layering techniques that didn't match Monet's documented methods from 1894, and signature placement that violated the artist's established patterns. Her words weren't memorized recitations of a precocious child. They were the technical observations of someone who understood Impressionist painting at a molecular level. The crowd's reaction shifted from dismissive amusement to uncomfortable recognition. Several guests were art collectors themselves, and they recognized authentic expertise when they heard it, regardless of its unexpected source. Dr. Martinez, a visiting curator from the Metropolitan Museum, stepped forward with obvious skepticism. "Where exactly did you learn to speak like this?" he demanded. "What school teaches 12-year-olds advanced art history in multiple languages?" "I taught myself," Zara replied, switching to English with the same flawless precision. "Every day for 8 years, while Mama cleaned these rooms, I studied the books in your library. I learned French because most authentication texts are written in French. I learned Italian for Renaissance studies, German for conservation techniques, Spanish for understanding Goya and Picasso in their original contexts." Marie Williams felt the world tilting beneath her feet. She'd known her daughter was brilliant. Zara had been reading at a college level since age 7, but she'd never imagined the true depth of her child's self-education. Watching Zara command a room full of millionaires using knowledge she'd stolen from library books and free smartphone apps was like discovering your backyard contained buried treasure. Dr. Whitmore's coffee cup trembled in her hands as professional implications crashed over her like a tsunami. If this child was correct about the Monet, if their $12 million acquisition was indeed a sophisticated forgery, the scandal would destroy careers, trigger lawsuits, and expose authentication failures that could destabilize the entire high-end art market. But more disturbing was the realization that genius had been walking their halls for nearly a decade, observing, learning, and developing expertise that rivaled graduate programs, while remaining completely invisible to the adults who prided themselves on recognizing talent. The signature placement alone should have triggered authentication concerns, Zara continued, her voice gaining confidence as she realized the adults were actually listening. Monet's Water Lily series from this period were consistently signed in the bottom left corner. This painting signature sits in the bottom right, which matches his earlier landscape work but not his 1894 Impressionist pieces. The paint analysis would reveal synthetic binders that weren't commercially available until the 1950s. Victoria Peyton's worldview was crumbling in real time. Everything she'd believed about intelligence, class, and social hierarchy was being demolished by a child she'd tried to dismiss as subhuman. "This is impossible," she whispered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Children from her background don't know these things." Dr. Whitmore stood slowly, her mind racing through possibilities that terrified and excited her equally. "Zara, I think you and I need to have a very long, very serious conversation about everything you've been learning in my library." 2 hours later, the mansion's private library had transformed from a gentleman's study into an interrogation room where genius was finally getting cross-examined. Dr. Whitmore watched in fascination as Zara's small fingers moved across leather-bound volumes with the confidence of someone who'd spent years navigating their contents in secret. The warm lamplight cast golden shadows across towering bookshelves that reached toward cathedral ceilings, but the real illumination was happening as this extraordinary child began revealing the true extent of her clandestine education. "Show me everything you know," Dr. Whitmore said simply, gesturing toward a mahogany desk stacked with art history texts worth more than most people's cars. What followed was a master class in autodidactic brilliance that would have impressed professors at Harvard, Yale, and Oxford combined. Zara opened a massive Caravaggio volume to a specific page without hesitation, her movements precise and purposeful. This Caravaggio was painted during his exile in Naples, 1609. You can identify the period by the desperate energy in his brushstrokes and the darker palette that reflects his psychological state after fleeing Rome. The chiaroscuro technique here shows his mastery of light manipulation during his most emotionally turbulent period. Dr. Whitmore's academic brain struggled to process what she was witnessing. This wasn't memorization. This was deep contextual understanding that connected artistic technique to historical circumstance, emotional state to creative output. "And this Picasso?" she asked, pointing to another reproduction, her voice barely concealing her amazement. "Blue Period, 1903. He painted this after his friend Carlos Casagamas committed suicide. The melancholy in the subject's posture isn't just artistic choice, it's Picasso processing his own depression and survivor's guilt. The monochromatic blue palette became his way of painting grief itself." For the next hour, Dr. Whitmore tested Zara with increasingly obscure references. Each answer delivered in the artwork's original language with scholarly precision that would shame graduate students. German for Dürer's technical innovations, French for Impressionist color theory, Italian for Renaissance perspective techniques. Each response demonstrated not just knowledge but wisdom, the ability to connect artistic movements to social upheavals, individual masterpieces to personal tragedies, technical innovations to cultural revolutions. "Your catalog entry for the Degas Ballet series is incorrect," Zara mentioned casually, pointing to a wall label with the confidence of someone who'd spent months studying every detail. "The costume styles and theater architecture place it in 1877, not in 1874. The Paris Opera House renovations weren't completed until 1875, and these ballerinas are wearing costumes that didn't exist in the earlier period." Dr. Whitmore's hands trembled as she consulted her authentication files. Zara was correct, an error that had been bothering her for months, but that she'd been too busy to investigate thoroughly. The implications were staggering. If this child could spot dating errors in established collections, what else had the art world's experts been missing? "How long have you been studying my collection?" Dr. Whitmore asked, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and growing horror at their collective blindness. "Since I learned to read," Zara replied softly, her confidence wavering for the first time as she remembered her place in the social hierarchy. "Mama started working here when I was 4. During her breaks, I'd sit in this library while she cleaned upstairs. The books became my teachers when I couldn't afford real ones." She gestured toward her cracked smartphone, held together with electrical tape.
I taught myself languages using free apps and library audiobooks. French first because most authentication texts are written in French, then Italian for Renaissance studies, German for conservation techniques, Spanish for understanding Goya and Picasso in their original contexts. The weight of systematic neglect pressed down on Dr. Whitmore like a physical force. This brilliant child had been creating her own doctoral-level education using discarded resources and determination, developing expertise that rivaled trained professionals, while the adults around her remained blind to her potential because of assumptions about class, race, and age. They'd been walking past a prodigy for nearly a decade, seeing only a maid's daughter instead of recognizing a mind that could revolutionize art authentication. I've identified several authentication issues with recent acquisitions, Zara continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. But who would believe a 12-year-old, especially one who looks like me and lives where I live? Those words hit Dr. Whitmore like a physical blow, exposing the ugly truth about institutional blindness and systemic discrimination that the art world preferred to ignore. "What authentication issues?" she asked, leaning forward with growing dread. The air in the library was so still it felt like the entire mansion was holding its breath. All eyes were fixed on the small girl who had just spoken a truth so large that it threatened to topple the foundations of the Dubois family legacy. Monsieur Thierry's face was a ghostly mask, his mouth slightly agape. Isabelle Dubois had taken a sharp step backward, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been physically struck. A copy, she whispered, the word fragile as glass. Chloe, emboldened by the truth now hanging in the open, stepped closer to the painting, her small finger pointing not at the subject, but at the lower corner where the artist's signature lay. "In the real one, the signature is different. Grandpère told me. He saw the real Serenité when he helped hang it for your grandfather, Monsieur Dubois, many years ago. The S in Sourdine had a tiny crack in the paint, like a little lightning bolt. This one," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "is smooth. It is a very good copy, but it is not the same." The revelation was a key turning in a long-locked door. Monsieur Thierry, the curator, finally found his voice, but it was a broken, hollow thing. I can explain," he began, but the fight had left him. The evidence was not in his favor, and the authority of a child, speaking with such unshakable certainty, had dismantled his defenses completely. Under the intense, betrayed gaze of Isabelle Dubois, the whole story tumbled out. It was a tale not of a single theft, but of a slow, patient replacement. The original had begun to show its age, a small crack in the varnish that worried Thierry. He had commissioned a flawless forgery to hang in its place, intending to send the original away for delicate, secret restoration. But the temptation had been too great. The restored original was too perfect, too valuable. He had sold it quietly to a private collector overseas, a transaction hidden by layers of shell companies and false documents, and left the copy in its place. The family, trusting him implicitly, had never noticed the switch. The money had been a temporary solution to his own spiraling debts, a secret he thought he had buried forever in the past. He never imagined a little girl, the daughter of a maid, would be the one to excavate it. The fallout was swift and severe. Terry was dismissed immediately, his reputation in tatters. The police and art fraud investigators were called. With the information Chloe and her mother provided about the true signature, the international search for the original Sérénité began anew. Isabelle Dubois, humbled and profoundly grateful, looked at Marie and Chloe not as staff but as saviors. She didn't just let them stay. She offered Marie a new, elevated position managing the estate's archives, a job that honored her intelligence and diligence. For Chloe, she established a formal scholarship, ensuring her education, especially her passion for art and languages, would be fully supported.
The little girl's future, once limited by circumstance, was now painted with the brightest of colors. The story didn't end with a punishment, but with a restoration. The Dubois family, shaken from their complacency, began to see the people within their home, not just the objects. And Chloe, the quiet observer, learned that her voice, no matter how small, could speak a truth that changed everything. She had looked at a world of polished surfaces and seen the crack beneath, proving that the most profound discoveries are often made by those who others never think to look at all.